Hi, and welcome back to Damn Parenting, your English-speaking parenting podcast from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. As always, we are your hosts, Eva and
Maren.
And today we are delighted to be joined back by Anne Graham, who joined us back in, I think it was at the end of March, where we were actually speaking to her about JellyPie FireFly and the book that she wrote with her daughter to help parents have the conversation with their children about ADHD and ADD and neurodiversity in general, and to help remove the stigma, I guess, would be how it would be. What do you think, Anne? Is that a good representation?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's just it's not always an easy thing to talk about, especially with young children, because, I mean, the letters themselves are very intimidating. Say, what does the D stand for? Disorder, so it's a difficult thing. So it's really about creating, a narrative that could play into the way children think, which can involve a lot of imagination and a lot of ideas that aren't sort of the adult kind of washed away of curiosity and fun and joy. And so it was trying to get back to that, but then tackling, serious topics about how the life of somebody living with ADHD as a young child might reflect differences and or sameness with those around them. So yeah, I think that's a nice summary. Mine's much longer.
Well, first of all, hi, and thank you so much for joining us again for our ADHD Awareness Month episodes, where so far we've been talking about the mother's aspect and parenting with ADHD and how to go about diagnosis, I guess, here in the Netherlands. But also now we're going to be looking from a parent's perspective, helping to support their child. First off, I guess the question we're going to really have to start with is, when did you first notice signs that something might be different with your daughter's behavior or attention span?
Yeah, it's a good question because, of course, the parents, we always suffer from revisionist history, right? Our children get older and then you look back and you wonder how much of the memories have been kind of altered by sort of the age they're in now. So, trying to give it as neutral of a feedback. I mean, she was a wonderful baby and a really, really great toddler. And I think those things reflect kind of how evolutionary the brain development really is and how much neurodivergent brains are really a natural and normal progression. Because really, we didn't start noticing it until I think more of the societal elements started to trigger it, right? Because when you're a parent, a lot of the things that manifest from, at least in her diagnosis, are actually kind of hyper attention focus, meaning, deep fascination with topics, abilities to sit with something for much longer than maybe a peer would. And you think to yourself, well, that's not attention deficit. That's like, something else.
Great, because I need to get a break because they can occupy themselves for 30 minutes with this ball.
Exactly. But then you start to see kind of what demands come out of age development. So think schedules. Schedules was a big trigger for us. So once you start getting to the more rigorous, schools in particular, so must be there at a certain time, must have certain kinds of accessories, if it's backpack lunches or things. And those were really the moments that started to reflect something that felt in a space that needed reflection and addressing, right? Because everybody wants their child to grow and develop the way they want. And so you don't like to put adult pressures on them when you don't have to, but they are going to live in a world with certain systems. And so you also can't ignore that at some point, maybe there's going to be a difference there and you need to address it. So I would say like 4 was really a seminal tipping point. And it was difficult for us to, I think, assume it was her in the sense, not that it's her exclusively, right? But assume it was something related to her because we had moved to the Netherlands around that time, right? So a lot of the behavior changes got a yes, but. Yes, but it's a new language. Yes, but it's a new environment. Yes, but we've just disrupted our lives and moved from New York to Amsterdam. So that, I think, is something, if I was, say, giving advice or maybe giving reflections to parents, it's okay to give your kids space. Like, we felt like we were giving her space. But it's also okay to say, as you see them interacting with the world and the world interacting with them, just to ask yourself, could these interactions be better? And that's where I think the context of it starts to come in. So that's what we ended up really tackling was, the environment around school was very, very challenging for her. I write a lot about this in the Kickstarter when we did the book. The idea of you have to eat lunch in 20 minutes at this window, regardless of what's going on. I mean, she'd come home with a full lunchbox having not eaten anything. And her comment was, I ran out of time, because she did not understand sort of schedule management in the way that it needed to happen. And so it's things like that. So for us, could I identify things in toddlerhood? Yeah, maybe. But ultimately, I think it was that intersection of kind of coming out of childhood and having a bit more rigor around, okay, now I'm a tiny human.
And how did you deal with this when you hear this? Because my initial thought would be like, oh, damn, I parented it wrong. Like I didn't set this in place. So I would immediately jump to me. Was there also then a delay of that loop that you felt like, oh, I didn't put this in place. It's my miss out, instead of, okay, I think I did everything okay. Maybe there's another issue. Was there a delay through that? Or did you immediately think, oh, okay, we need to find a better way to make her able to deal with these windows better?
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest, I still think it's me. I think every mother can appreciate that comment, right? Because it's never a single, action and reaction.
Yeah.
It's a constantly changing and evolving situation. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of insecurity when we first started contending with it. I was also pregnant with my second at the time. I think that was also the yes, but as well, of just motherhood, how much was me, how much was just natural for children becoming their own person. And I still question it, but I think the kind of forgiveness I was able to find in myself was when you just give space to ask a question, then it's okay, right? Because whether the answer you get is helpful, not helpful, you just at least give the space, right? And that's where I gave space to myself as a mother to ask, what could I be doing better? And working with our daughter's therapist was also giving us very good parenting tactics to identify, okay, what exactly was affecting her in a perspective more from her, that we could then say, okay, now I get why your context, my context, they're not the same. But then also the reality is it's always going to be in every human interaction, you're going to be you and they're going to be them, and you're going to need to figure out what works in the middle. And now what I loved and why I kind of took upon the project of writing the book was at least I can talk to her about why I might not see something the way she sees something. And she's old enough now, we can do that. But when they're little, you can't, right? I mean, really little, it's very difficult to help them see that aspect. So yeah, I mean, I think the insecurity is real, and no one should feel like it's a shame either, right? To feel insecure about it. And no one should feel ashamed if they're questioning if their child might have tendencies this way. And I also think people shouldn't sort of pick up on the element of it being, quote unquote, trendy. It's not trendy because it's on TikTok. It's just much more acceptable to talk about it. And you're not chasing a fad by saying, I see something here, it has real world consequences for me, for my child. I should understand it better. I think it's safe to say that. I think it's safe for people to feel that way. And I think it's also, a natural progression that you might not get the answers you want and or need, but at least you've gone through the process and you can better understand the relationship with your child. So yeah, every day.
So circling back to something you were mentioning about for example, the lunch, can you identify any other specific behaviors or challenges that actually made you, think this is ADHD?
A really, really common one, overstimulation for children can kind of look a lot of different ways. At least in our situation, that led to almost full-blown panic attacks. And that was a few instances that I saw that really actually quite frightened me because I wasn't quite sure what was going on. My husband will reflect on this, but there was a situation we were traveling, of course, sensory overload from traveling. Our daughter hadn't really rested super well, and she effectively just kind of had too much, and became so almost overworked that she was kind of gulping for breath, kind of this, and that was the kind of breaking point for me of like, this is where I do think I need to ask someone about this, right? And because of course you see what a tantrum looks like, or you see what a misbehavior looks like. And this just looked and behaved, differently. And that's where I felt like that concept of what hyperactivity disorder can imply is that it's not that they're active kids. That's not the problem. It's when that overactivity really can put their brain in a situation of struggling for, emotional regulation, and or, kind of physical boundaries. We have a lot of conversations around what, can be too much from a safety perspective. We had a younger daughter and our older daughter, we had to be quite clear of, these behaviors with this little one, they cannot be safe. And you have to talk a lot about that because, of course, there are the realities of sharp objects and breakable TVs or whatever. And sometimes those things just aren't being processed in the brain. So I think some natural things to look for, especially for young, emotional regulation is a big one. And that's difficult because, of course, kids don't know how to emotionally regulate. But this is when you really see it go to very physical reactions, very, and I don't like the word extreme, but something that you really feel like is probably compromising maybe their health and well-being, then you can say, okay, this is probably not how this would go. Then you would think, as things start to get older and you start to see the demands of society, task completion is a very clear and obvious one that I think all parents with children, either diagnosed or suspecting a diagnosis, would say, I asked you to put on your shoes 5 times. Why are there no shoes? And that's also where it's easy to excuse it's kids, but at some point routines are routines. And so you see how children are very adaptable. Okay, now I put on my shoes, and so they know to put on their shoes. My oldest now is over 9 and frequent reminders all the time, just because the ability to kind of remember and say, I was asked to do this, now it needs to be done, and then I need to move on. Yeah, it's just a constant struggle for her. And we've had to adjust our perception that she needs that. So we can't get upset if we have to ask 5 times for shoes. So
I know how that feels. So you said you moved here when she was 4. So did she go straight into school then when you moved?
Yeah, she was just a few months in, say 6 months, because we moved at the beginning of the year. She was 3.5 and then turned 4 while we were here. And then she started school. So yeah, and we originally did a bilingual Dutch school. And I think the early years also had her in Poeder school, to everyone who speaks Dutch, for what I just did there. In a Buddhist school. And that started manifesting some things as well, right? Because there were some schedules that were, put on your rain boots because we're going into the park. Oh, you've forgotten to put on your rain boot, or, so there were kind of micro signs with that. But starting school at 4 was really right when we started to, I think, see a tipping point.
So were these caregivers or teachers actually mentioning these things to you?
At first, it was mentioned with, and again, this is the kind of yes, but, right? So even the teachers said, yes, but it'll be hard for her. The language, yes, but, they're all just 4. Yes, but there's 23 kids in the classroom. It's pretty crazy, And then there's an amount of time, and it wasn't weeks, but it wasn't years. It was months, where we had sit downs that were properly like, okay, this is not sort of appropriate behavior for the classroom. Inability to sit in group was a good one. So I think for parents trying to maybe suss out some identifying factors here, like the ability to kind of sit in a designated group environment, say, okay, now this is group time. That was one that came up pretty early. The lunch thing was another good one in terms of saying, okay, that should be a task a 4-year-old even can kind of know to complete. And so that was somewhat of a dilemma. And then, as I said, big classroom, a lot of kids, kind of the working groups, smaller working groups were also even a struggle. So sort of, okay, everybody's now doing art at this table, sit and do art. And then my daughter's up and running over and grabbing some Legos because she's like, yeah, I don't want to do art, So there was a nice dialogue, I think, early on from the teachers about kind of identifying these things. And actually, the very first teacher she had was the one who did go to the school administration and get help from the Kabouter House. So we had somebody within a year of her starting school that was doing in-classroom support,
wow.
Which I think in hindsight, we were extremely lucky that we got it so early. And the person we got was absolutely wonderful. So those 2 factors I would put in the really positive experience bucket.
So it was actually the teacher themselves that was able to, her experience with your daughter is basically what prompted her to actually seek professional help then.
So the way I think a lot of parents will know, there's a teacher shortage. So a lot of these teachers are very young. And the system, if I understand it correctly, so anyone listening who knows it better than I, please fact check this. But what I understand is, the schools are actually set up with a lot of resources, but they just have to ask, right? So there's a lot of government entities, like I said, the Kabouter House is what referred this outside support. And then the school has to just take on the administrative burden of saying, okay, we need some help. This is what it looks like, right? And this particular teacher, she was young-ish, younger than all of us on this call, right? And I really appreciated that she approached it as well as learning for her. She said openly to us, she said, I don't always know how to handle this situation. So I would appreciate the help as an educator in what to do here. And like in hindsight, teacher of the year award, right? Because I really think it's like that. It takes a lot of humility. I think it takes a lot of grace. And I think it just takes that why you become a teacher in the first place, that every child matters to you. And, we didn't necessarily, I think, have a sense of how grateful we should have been. I think we were just like, yeah, cool, call in the troops, But once I look at the whole journey and see that, I mean, that is such a wonderful contribution and made a huge difference, I think, early on, and helped us start a path that was many years in the making. But yeah, I think that act alone was really, really wonderful.
So helpful. I mean, she could have been the complete opposite, like, this is not working, or like, just go down the other direction. And like you said, it's so humbling to see that someone says, I think I need some help here because I want to make this work for her, because obviously everyone is having a hard time here. And it's not just for her to adjust and for her to finally get her stuff together and finally figure out how to sit in a circle, but we need some extra help. And yeah, that gives me faith back.
It does,
that
yeah.
there's people out there who really see, but also this whole story that you're telling, I hope that everyone listening out there sees it is a process, and it's a lot of people seeing different things and then accumulating this picture of, all right, I think we need a little bit of outside help here, instead of, because also as a parent, you're like, I don't want her to have this struggle. Like, I don't wish for her to have this. So let me find an explanation for this. Let me find a, at least for me, I could speak, okay, I don't want to deal with this diagnosis, because then I know this is her life. It's how hard it is for her to navigate all this. So I guess this is also this whole really turning a seeing eye on this and be like, yes, this is the facts, and we can get help, and we can make this work for her if we all try to figure out how can we all work together here.
And the outcome of that, which I hope is kind of the reality of kind of a life's journey with some of these diagnoses, is when you're aware of it and you can have these kinds of healthy and constructive dialogues about it, the entire environment gets better. I mean, the best part about that is a classroom of I can only imagine 20 to 4 and 5-year-olds. I mean, it's not, I don't have the integrity for that, right? Like, and they do. And it's true that, when you have such an obvious kind of behavioral challenge in one area, it does kind of cross affect everything. And so she was really honest to Dutch, right? And really upfront about, I also have a classroom dynamic I need to manage here. And so some of this is to get the support I need so I can have a sit down, everybody group music lesson, sit down, everybody talk about numbers, And so it's okay that it was a little bit self-serving, because that is the truth, right? And so a lot of what we continually go through, because it's not sort of an end goal to get a diagnosis, right? And I think parents should understand that. The goal is not a diagnosis, yeah? It is merely a tool to help unlock all of the things that afford your children, your peers, because of course I think there's a lot of older diagnoses happening as well. It's just a tool to afford you a better understanding of kind of what it takes to be in the context that isn't set up for this, right? So, the noise canceling headphones, it seems cliche, they go a long way. They're a very simple tool, very easy to access. If a school won't supply it, you can send it on your own. A very common thing you might see across the spectrum is actually chewing. So if you see a lot of pencils chewed or objects chewed, you can identify that. That is very common. So we've gone and gotten these necklaces. They're the kind of, rubber. So those can be chewed instead of pencils or pens or hard objects that can hurt teeth. And so those things, it's just to explain to be it educators or others in the environment, like, you're going to see this totally fine. Everybody's good with it. It helps you. It helps us. It helps everyone in the classroom. And that was kind of what those first years really were. And what really kind of shifted the journey, and some of this, again, I've talked about publicly, but, then you have an educator who wasn't necessarily willing to adopt those changes. And I think that's where that element of feeling like you have to push is okay, right? Like, your child, you start to know better where they are in their journey, where you are in your journey as a parent. And we didn't have her diagnosis yet, so that wasn't opportune, but we knew she needed help. We did. And when it was rescinded from the school, they said they didn't have the resources to continue to do it. I mean, everything, went sideways. So it's okay to feel like something's working. Let's lean into that, And if it's not working, just ask yourself why, and start to unpack, alternatives.
Speaking of the diagnosis, can you actually talk us through the diagnosis process? Like what kind of assessments or tests or whatever because I can't imagine it can be the same for the adults, like what I went through, that what the children do. So
Yep. So I don't know how much a GP will be involved. So I'll just tell ours with a clear amount of ignorance around if you were going through more like the Dutch health system. We ended up going through our school system. So ours is the international school, which gets support from the Dutch government. So we're half Dutch, half international. It's probably the best way to look at it. ACE is the school's name. And they had her transcripts, and we were quite clear upfront about coming in with questions, and they were very gracious to say, yeah, but we're going to do an independent assessment. And I really appreciated that, because I think it was a helpful way of saying, you just don't know, like, you're really getting a child from a different environment. Let's see how she is in this environment. And it gave us about 6 months to say, what does it look like? And they had many of the similar, kind of points of feedback, and were very supportive. And they were then able to give us a referral to an educational psychiatrist. And then that was the individual who did both in-classroom assessment, out-of-classroom assessment. We had several months of, in therapy assessment to kind of really look at it across behavioral considerations. This was very much briefed on her in-classroom behavior. So what we were specifically tackling was she was unable to read in group. This would have been group 4. And of course, some of the behavioral challenges around sort of the sitting still, ability to participate in group, time management, things like that. So very specific school things to deal with. So if you're not coming through the school system, you may be getting a slightly different perspective, which I think is also okay. But our immediate need was really where she stood in terms of school. So that meant that the psychiatrist we worked with was really, going through there's a standard test for children. I don't know the name of it, sorry. But the test itself really asks the kind of questions we're talking about here, task completion, and also asks a lot about how to peers. So if you hear a word like severe, that's not the way you'd think of a medical condition like, stage 4 cancer, it's so severe. It's severe just actually means it presents kind of in all areas of life. So there is an element of spectrum speaks to everything. Sometimes it manifests in certain situations, more triggering situations, and environments maybe like home might be less present. And so they looked at everything, they looked at her across her environments and kind of how it would manifest, and then how you would expect to have, adjustments to that. Because then you get the diagnosis and immediately go into, okay, so what? And it was extremely helpful, because ADHD, I think, didn't feel at all surprising for us at that point, but dyslexia as well. That was very surprising. We got a really good education on what dyslexia truly means. I think we were the 80s and 90s babies, so we're like, letters are misplaced. It's a brain processing issue, and we see how dyslexia actually applies to things beyond reading. Very helpful to get an education from them on that, and what that means for her also for the long run as well, right? So how much of that can really mature, but then how that's probably something she'll be dealing with for a good portion of her life. And then a motor sensory disorder, which basically means a lot of the context around her is actually not processing at the speed that we have. So lots of bumping into doors and lots of bumping toes or tripping. And the poor kid was covered in bruises when she was really young. And you call them clumsy, but in fact, it is related to the neurodivergent spectrum of processing, objects and physical surroundings is different. And I mean, talk about an aha moment for us. You feel like, oh, thank God they're not covered in bruises because I'm just not putting a helmet on them on the feet. It is a reality that there's lots of intersection. It's comorbidities is the technical term, but a lot of intersections of different brain processes. And the diagnosis is really a benefit because you shouldn't look for it to kind of unlock something, right? It can, and it does, but it's also just a really great way of defining what you already know. And so there's no mystery about it. There's no excuses for it. You just feel like, oh, yes. Oh, that's why that's that way. So much easier to understand, so much easier to execute improvements or have conversations about quality of life. The process was really well handled. And then, of course, to kind of close the loop on what happens then, because this was through the school's referral, they got the report. It went to a learning and development specialist, and we set out an individual education plan for her. And all of her adjustments are written, what she has access to, quiet spaces, free time, additional time for things like reading, testing, and other requirements in school. And it's something we revisit twice a year. So it's an active, moving, and evolving thing. And then, the question of how that plays out in life is like, I mean, school is such a big part of children's lives that we see a lot of those behaviors are extremely beneficial for us at home, in social situations, when we travel, things like that. So I think the thought I would have is if you don't have a single resource like a school and you do want to consider a diagnosis, you can go direct and you can ask GPs for referrals. I think for the most part, if you have a good GP, that probably give you a referral. And, I'd say I'm an American, so cost-wise, it's different here. It's like less expensive. It's not free, but it's less expensive. But it might be worth investing. If you don't have somebody telling you have to do it, but you as a parent really believe it could be beneficial, it might be worthwhile to look into, just because the exercise, the indicators they look for, they really facilitate a lot of healthy learning and a lot of healthy dialogue, in my experience.
When you actually got this diagnosis then, so you spoke about you spoke about your emotions there, that there was a bit of a relief, but it was also the fact that it was more ahas and there was more awareness. So did that actually change your approach to parenting or how you were supporting your daughter's needs?
1,000%. I mean, first off, like I said, like some of that shame that you feel gets very like washed away because that's unfair. It probably changes because then you start to regret every time you've yelled at them. and then you're like, okay, no. I think it's more to say that it gets washed away in terms of it's okay if you don't know, right? Like it's okay that you don't totally know your children when they come out the womb. That's okay. Like that was, I think, the thing for me, because my first was, I was in my mid-30s. We were working in New York. My husband was doing a lot of work with intense commuting. And so I spent a ton of time with her, and she and I like buds, right? And you think, how can I not know this about this, little buddy of mine, right? And so you kind of take this element of, okay, I didn't know, now I do. Now I can better, understand when something's happening, that it's not because she's not listening. It's not because she's blowing me off because I'm her mom. It's not because she doesn't want to, say, put on her shoes and go to school or whatever. It's just really her brain will process at the pace it's set to process. And I have to be respectful of that and give her space. A good example, actually, it's really funny. She hated bike riding when she was little. And you're like, well, we live in the Netherlands. Probably not optional. So all we did was take off the training wheels, put it in the front of the house, and just let her decide. Really, we're just like, you just decide how much you're going to do it, how much you're going to want to. And she got so big that it was like the bike that we had, she had her feet on the ground. And that was actually the safe spot for her. If she could put her feet fully on the ground, then she was comfortable. And then she'd try a little, and then she'd try a little more, she'd try a little bit more. And I'm telling you, it was like an overnight switch where she was not comfortable on a bike. And then in a day, she was on it. And now totally comfortable, wants to go out in the street without a helmet. Americans like, be careful of this. So I do think a lot of those behaviors are very, very common. This idea of like, they will get there, but they're only going to get there in their own time and in their own way. And you need to, as a parent, I've had to force myself to say, I cannot tell her how to do things. I just can't. And even if it's like killing me to watch, like, do it this way. It's really telling myself to let her decide how she wants to show up. And it's a good bit of relief, but it's always stressful. It's always stressful because as a parent, you also still have to, get them to school and get them to do spelling and but just affording maybe extra time, in the mornings to get ready, affording maybe some extra space around activities because activities can be really intense. I think a lot of people think if you're ADHD, you should like overbook kids. Don't. Leave them space in between. I think, nodding because you know, right? When you're overbooked, you get overstimulated and then things start to shut down. And I think that's why, the diagnosis is very, very helpful to just allow yourself to think differently and not feel guilty about it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, what you're just saying there refers to us as mothers, in fairness. That we're like trying not to pack in so much stuff as well for ourselves. So, I think that's something myself and Maren have discussed in the past is like trying not to overbook because the kids don't need it. They're not going to be competing for the best kid or, the spelling bees. Like we're not going to put them under the pressure. So you spoke about there a few of the lifestyle changes that you were talking about, about how you're talking about, get your boots on and, for the 500th time, please put your boots on. We have to get to school. How is that actually going now that you're a couple of years into this journey? So how is that actually going with routines and structures and the implementation of any coping strategies that you figured on the way?
There's the micro side of it, which can be just a daily, like, tell myself to calm the F down. There's that. Just like, you're aggravated, but that doesn't help her. So there's that, right? But then it's actually been good, although difficult, but good because you also can have, I think, really big conversations with family. And I think telling grandparents, for instance, that like this kid is maybe not going to show up the way you want her to has been wonderful. Right? Because there's always a bit of a perception about how relationships should look. And especially with neurodivergent brains that can be cross spectrum, think, social interactions and, attention, and then also kind of empathy as well, right? Like a deep, deep empathy. You get reactions and then people always wonder, like, is it me? And it's nice. It's nice to be able to just say, it's okay that it's her and it's not you. And then let's start from there and see what that starts to look like. So the example I'll give is I didn't grow up in an environment where we did like horseback riding. I was in an area of the world that had rodeos and things, but I think little, I was terrified of horses. So my oldest loves them. I think animals are a very calming force. I think they're a beautiful partner to neurodivergent brains because there's some kind of just lovely evolution between us and nature when you have, I think, neurodivergency. I think there's an understanding there that we as humans and scientists don't fully understand. When she's horseback riding, she's so peaceful, so living in that moment, really having a connection. And so now we have an annual tradition. At Christmas, we go back to the US and in Arizona, and we do a desert ride every year with her and her grandpa. And they just love it because it's like very cool and calming for him. I think he might have bought a cowboy hat. I don't know, specifically for such occasions. But it's not something we would have maybe chosen normally. Like I wouldn't have said, oh, that's on my life to-do list. And yet, because it's just so perfectly suited for her and he enjoys it, and of course I have fun with it as well, it's just become like a lovely, lovely tradition. And I think that's where that idea of kind of small is like giving some space and sort of like de-stressing it, Big is like, do we need to make big changes? Like, do we really need to totally, overhaul it? I mean, I'm pretty open about the school aspect, which has now become an absolutely game-changing in a good way part of her evolution as a person, as just her capabilities totally shine because she's being so supported there. We're leaning into that. We moved to be closer to the school. We, made some choices about things like transportation and stuff to just make it easier because it was like, look, you can live where it's hard or you can live where it's a little bit easier. So I think there's micro and there's macro. And I think that's where how it's going is it's going to be every day, right? And I think it's going to be every day, whether you're the one who's diagnosed or you're the one who's living in a household with a diagnosis, it will be every day. But it is better because it's not mysterious, it's not surprising, and it's not intimidating.
And it's amazing because the fact that you actually went out of your way to actually create a book to be able to help your daughter to understand it, because there isn't that many facilities, I guess, nor attention to give the respect to the child to help them understand it, because it's always given to the parents because the parents are in control, the parents are the responsible ones, so they have to be the ones who understand everything. But the fact you've gone out of your way to actually provide something supporting for your daughter that she then became empowered with, that she became proud of with the work that you guys did as well, I'm sure. And I know that book has been passed around quite a few places at this stage. So it's been amazing to see the growth of it. What advice could you actually give any parents here in the Netherlands who suspect that their child may have ADHD based on your own experience?
I would say don't hesitate to investigate, and it's an intimidating way to start by thinking, okay, I have to figure out the whole system. But I wouldn't. I would start with the individuals you know, right? So if those are educators, ask questions of your educators. If those are other parents, there's a lot of great parent groups of different stories, a really, really great environment. I know you've interacted with them and they have a nice parent group. So if you don't know where to start, just start with what you know. And you know your kids, you know the people around you. If you start to get that layer isn't getting you in the right direction, then I'd say, yes, do a bit of research, but I would think the easiest way to start is with those around you. So that's schools. I think that's caregivers. I think that's other parents at other families. If you're looking for kind of more broader resources, there are some really great kind of online groups that have resources that give good advice. CHADD, CHADD is a nice resource that puts out a lot of literature that can be just helpful tips and hints. It's a little bit more American in style, but I think it has some universal, helpful things. And I think if you're also struggling with your parenting of, it is cliche, but it's totally okay to get a therapist involved. It is an absolutely helpful resource to say, I don't know if I'm doing this right, and just get somebody to talk to. And I thought that was a really nice experience of having the therapist working with our daughter, because then we were able to have family discussions, what that meant for parenting, what that meant for the relationship that we would then have. And I think that was something I would just say totally destigmatize. I think a lot of people still have a bit of stigma about, do I need to get asked for help as a mother? Like, this human lived in my body. Do I really need the help? Yes. Yes. If you feel like you do, yes. And if you want to make it specific to, don't understand what I'm dealing with a neurodivergent brain, that's okay. Say it that way, right? And I think there's plenty of experts. There's an autism specialist just down the road from us. And of course, she's fully booked. So trying to get into one is a different story. I can't help you there. But I think all of those are ways to at least get started. And then just know that getting started one way probably isn't the way you're going to keep going. And that's okay too, because it will change, especially as your kids start to get older as well. And their relationship to it becomes different. I mean, the thing we did with the book, I'll just tell a quick story. We did a reading at our school. I went with my co-author, Marika, and we sat with a group of kids. And we tell what the book is. We say JellyPie FireFly. It's a book designed to spark conversation between children and their carers as they navigate living with the letters ADHD. And this boy goes, ooh, isn't that bad?
Oh.
And exactly what you're saying. It just speaks to the element of the kids having comfort, and also around other kids, that this topic isn't taboo, that this topic isn't something they should be ashamed of or afraid of, and that they should feel like they can advocate for themselves. As they get older, I see this now as she's getting into group 6, she has to be able to tell a teacher when she needs help. She has to raise her hand and say, I'm really tired. I need to step out. This is too much. I can't sit here right now, or whatever. And she's learned those tactics from every step of the process. Those early contributors who were very good at helping with, say, task management, the later psychiatrist who did a lot of emotional regulation. I mean, those things are, you just pick them up along the way. So if you don't know who to call, call your own mother, right, as well. And just, my mom, when I kind of said, hey, I think there's something going on here, she was the first one to say, so get help.
I mean, what you're just talking about there with your daughter raising her hands and saying, okay, I need to check out because it's getting a lot. Honestly, I would say the majority of us mothers can't even do that when we actually really need to. So the fact that your 9-year-old is able to identify, signal, and then able to take care of herself is absolutely phenomenal. So well done for you.
Well, thank you. I'll take the compliment, but I'll say what's really the compliment goes to her, because she's now just understood that that's good for her and it's good for the classroom as well. But I think the credit to educators for evolving their way of thinking as well, at least the ones we're dealing with, are very, I think, modern in their approach, which is, I also recognize that I can push you more when I know this, right? So, we get a lot of feedback about what she's really good at, and they lean into that with her. She's, think by group 4 was still struggling to read. Now she can sit down with a full book, start to finish. And so if there's an environment that isn't working for her and the teacher says, here, go read this and report back. So it's also nice because I think a lot of parents worry it's like backing off of, and I really think if you do it well and you talk to your peers and you talk with educators and you talk with other parents, I think what you're getting is actually the best out of who they are as humans, And so it's adjustments to afford their way of working, but it's not soft. I think there's a lot of this perception it's softening it. Like it's really not. It's actually just giving the space to let the things that are really, really good about neurodiversity, shine through. And I think that's where it's everything from, so handwriting is a very real struggle for my daughter because, again, it's kind of a motor sensory thing, the idea of like having to, but now spelling is coming into play and has an incredible memory. So she needs more time to do a spelling test, but she can also do more words, just remember more words, spell them correctly, know what their meanings are. But yeah, she needs more time for the test. And that's where I think the teacher is saying, okay, so give me more words. I'll give you 15 more minutes to work on something. I think there's that element of like, they actually see it for what it is, which is it's a healthy way to push them, but just push them in a way that they understand and they're comfortable with it and they can give you their best.
Wow.
What I'm also hearing is a lot of that. What your story also tells us that if you have the suspicion and even then if you have a diagnosis, you need to go out instead of in, because the initial reaction would be, oh God, okay, now I have to shield myself from the world. I have to shield them. I have to fix them first before we can go into certain places. But it's actually the other way around. The more you need to open up more, you need to open up the conversation, you need to open up the spaces, you need to experiment within those different spaces. How can we make it work? So it's actually really getting the bravery of, and now especially I have to go out, especially I can reach out, especially I can connect, especially I can experiment and get into all these environments instead of okay, now we have to close the door, not talk to anyone, shield them in a even special environment. And that's the whole discussion of then specialized schools. Yes, for some people it is beneficial, but now we can hear also that she's living in society, she's living in life, she's living in the world. She will not always be shielded and she will not always then depend on these isolated environments because she can navigate within the open world with her extra space, with her ability to step back and learn the tools and really live with her life and how she is wired instead of, I can't be part of a normal, I don't want to say normal, but I can't be part of the bigger thing because I'm not capable to do it.
It's spot on. It's spot on to kind of the live out loud mentality. Absolutely. Because it's only going to, define more of the limitations when you try to cut it back. And for those who really are dealing with severe, there are wonderful schools. We visited the one in Amsterdam that services children who have, particularly extreme ASD, Tourette's, and other things that can make it very, very difficult to be in a standard classroom. But they set it up like a school, like any other school. You don't know it's different from the outside. The environments look very similar, behave very similar, and they just, afford children who may need specialized care in their education pathways that. And so it's not that it's an either or it's not that it's kind of a, black and white. It's just an element of kind of, you start to see what children need at various ages. And then you just need those resources around you to have a dialogue. And that's why that living out loud thing is so important, as you said, because if you're not actually talking about it in real time, you either miss the growth opportunities, those kind of tipping points. Like I said, the reading element for us was a tipping point. Like if you're behind on reading, your whole educational journey will be a problem, right? So we had a very serious reaction to whoa, if this is where we stand, we have to do something. And then as you get kind of these later in life, and you're dealing with more maybe of the social and emotional elements of it, and we all know that's terrifying in and of itself, but at least you're preparing your children earlier to communicate who they are, communicate how they like to show up. We live on this lovely little street where it's just, kids along the road, and some of them are our oldest age, and they all play, but, she'll kind of play her own way, and then they'll kind of play their way, and they don't always intersect, but they're all outside and they're doing it at the same time. We've lived here for about a year, and I finally told one of the parents, because we were just chit-chatting, and said, oh yeah, I don't know if you knew, but and she said, oh, she should tell the kids. She should tell them. She should say, I don't want to play that game. That's not my thing and stuff. And I appreciate that a parent's thinking that way, right? Because it's also then, you don't feel like you have to explain yourself, but you're also just saying like, I'm not playing with you, but I like that you're here.
Yeah.
And I think that's a nice language for kids to speak,
I think the adults call that body doubling, where we're kind of like, as long as we're beside each other, we're kind of not responsible, but we're kind of there for each other, and we're actively being able to do something. So,
yeah. Well, there are social situations where you think, can I just body double out?
Oh, I know that all too well. If you want to hear any more about JellyPie FireFly, we have her on the Damn Chats 11, and it was published back at the end of March. You can always go back and listen into that episode about the story of the book, how they came about it, what they did, as I think there was 4 of you involved. Do you want to name drop them all?
Yes. So everybody knows the story, created it when my daughter was diagnosed, and I sort of had a panic about how I was going to communicate this with her. But then I called up my amazing friend, Marika Stake, who co-authored the book with me, and getting it to, crazy idea, words on paper, into an actual story that would engage and bring kids something of joy. And then we found Emma Gandolfi. She's an amazing illustrator based here in the Netherlands. She does a lot of our affairs. Look her up. Her work's incredible. And she created our beautiful Firefly. And then Dr. Naomi, who I think a friend of the pod, right? So when we were coming up with the idea, Marika and I had actually been to one of her parenting courses. And because Marika and I had been friends for years, and both mothers, and thought, hey, let's give this a go. And really had a lovely experience with her, and how she talked about some of the psychological safety that you need as a community of mothers. And it was really lovely when we met her, and we took the idea of JellyPie to her, and she had a lot of great feedback as to how it could work, mechanically. Is it the right kind of way to talk about the topic? Is it, in fact, something a therapist would advise? And so we had her write a nice little piece about it in the book as a parent's guide, because I think that's where we all see our vulnerability is like, am I doing this right? Am I not doing this right? So it's been an incredible team, an incredible journey. I mean, the feedback we get affirms to me that there was an unmet need here, right? That people really needed a way to bring a difficult topic, but into a child's mindset. I think there's quite a lot of literature, and the letters are out there. But for me, it was actually being able to give my daughter a tool to say, this is me, and it's a firefly because they glow, and the ADHD is a glow magic. So it's wonderful and interesting and dynamic things to it. So yeah, I think that part of it, albeit a public facing exercise, probably speaks volumes to anybody listening who's going through the process with their kids, right? That you see the joys, but the struggles are real as well, and complicated and nuanced in terms of how you communicate with kids. So yeah, and if you want to learn more, we've got our website, JellyPieFireFly.com. And of course, we're on Instagram, where we talk about if we're doing any readings, and where you can find the book. So check it out.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again, and for being part of our ADHD Awareness Month, where we're trying to talk about all different elements. We are actually speaking with someone from a school who'll be able to talk to us about the school side of elements, because your story was so interesting. Because as an adult, we spoke about my diagnosis, which again was just through my therapist, my GP, going to ADHD Centrum. But actually for a child, it's just a completely different world. And especially when you have parents who are not neurodivergent, and then it's a completely different world. And nowadays, no one wants to add labels to their children, because then it separates them and makes them different. And then you don't want to have to do this, especially when you're living abroad. You don't have your immediate friends and family around you. And so there's all these extra challenges we have to face. So thank you for coming on and being part of our community, and showing your face, and showing your book, and telling us your story. coming up in a couple of weeks, we'll have Kate, who'll be able to join us from the educational side of things to talk about how they work in schools and how they show up, not every school, but in their school anyway for now. So thank you again.
Thank you both. And thanks for taking the moment during October. It's nice to have a dedicated window to say we should talk about this, because I think it's a topic that's everyday for some people, but really difficult sometimes to get focus and attention as to how to really manage it. So appreciate you guys doing it. And thanks for having me.
And if you just were completely started with all the information and you already forgot where to find Anne, you can jump on our Instagram, Damn Parenting Podcast, where we will, of course, have another cheat sheet for you with all the information that Anne just provided for us, where you can also find her Instagram handle and the website and all the useful tips and tricks that she just provided for us, summarized in a cute little reel, in a cute little post that Eva's going to put out.
No stress.
No stress. And if you want to dive back into our past episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts, and dive into a full loophole or rabbit hole of getting educated about the Dutch healthcare system or parenting in the Netherlands. You can find us, I said, on Instagram. You can also drop us an email, damnparentingpodcast@gmail.com, if there's any further questions or conversation that you want to start with us. We are coming out every Wednesday with an expert episode. And hopefully we will see you or hear you on the next episode. Make sure you like and subscribe and share this episode with anyone who you think should be hearing this piece of information. That was it for now.
Bye.